Welcome to What is Going for new thought from the edge of Each week on OMTimes flagship radio show, veteran broadcaster, author, and media consultant Sandie Sedgbeer conducts thought-provoking interviews with inspirational authors, artists, musicians, scientists, speakers, and filmmakers who are working at the point where spirituality and science meet consciousness at the very edge of Here is your host, Sandie Sedgbeer.
Hello. For nigh on 12 centuries, pilgrims have been walking the Camino, a network of routes traversing France, Spain, and Portugal that lead to the shrine of the Apostle St. James the Great in the Cathedral of Santiago de Compostela in Galicia in northwestern Spain. In recent years, interest in this pastime has surged to the point where more than 200,000 people from around the world undertake some or all of this 500-mile journey every year. Over the past decade, I've interviewed several travellers who've made movies or written travel guides and memoirs about the Camino. And during that time, not in any of their narratives has anyone breathed a word about the ancient mysteries of web-footed Virgin Marys, mother goddesses, Templar Knights, fairy tales, and geese that fill the pages of the book, The Way of the Wild Goose, 3 pilgrimages following geese, stars, and hunches on the Camino de Santiago by today's guest, award-winning travel writer, anthropologist, essayist, and author, Beebe Bahrami. Beebe, welcome.
Thank you, Sandie. It's so wonderful to be here.
So you're known for your travel narratives, your guidebooks, and your memoirs, which include Café Oc, A Nomad's Tales of Magic, Mystery, and Finding Home in the Dordogne, Café Neanderthal, Excavating Our Past in one of Europe's most ancient places, The Spiritual Traveller, Spain, Moon Camino de Santiago, and of course, The Way of the Wild Goose. So tell us what first attracted you to the Camino.
Oh, I was a college student, an exchange student in the south of Spain in 1986, and I was in a history of Spain course, and my professor uttered those 3 words, Camino de Santiago, and I didn't even know yet what they were. He hadn't started lecturing about them, but they just wedged their way into my cell tissue, and I thought, whatever that is, I have to find out more about it. And then when I learned that it was this historic medieval pilgrimage route across not just northern Spain, but all of Spain, Portugal, France, webs across Europe, I just fell in love with this idea, this high adventure of becoming a pilgrim on the road to Santiago. And it took 9 years, but I finally got there, and I never stopped going back. It's a magical journey.
You said you stepped onto the Camino in 1995, but right from that very first moment, you felt that you had found your place in the world. I mean, what was that feeling like?
A very visceral feeling of belonging. Yeah, it's just everything felt right. I felt like it was my own native ground that I was walking on and passing through. And the experiences just opened me up to many more layers in the world and possibilities, but also inside myself.
Did you feel that you knew this place, this land?
Yes. Going back to 1986, 9 years before I even got to walk the Camino de Santiago, I finished that semester and I was journeying up to Paris to visit cousins. And just on the train, as we were traversing those northern lands of Spain, going through Navarra and Basque Country, and then into Aquitaine in southwestern France, I felt this uncanny, energetic pull. And it was an overnight train and I couldn't sleep. I just stood at the window and gazed out the window and vowed that I would go back. And I did. It took a while, but I did. And that feeling was still there. It's like nothing I've ever felt before, and it doesn't go away. I can only say it was announcing to me that if you take up this invitation, there's a lot for you here to learn. And, it's encoded inside you as well. I think anyone could say that, but we all find our own place. We navigate the inner and outer map as is most appropriate to us. And this was mine. Yeah.
I first heard about the Camino when I read Shirley MacLaine's book. And it just felt like the most magical place to me. It drew me. Since then, as I mentioned in the intro, I have interviewed many people who've written books about the Camino, books about their own experience, movies about the Camino, and even the guy who writes the Camino guides, John Brierley, I've interviewed him as well. But I've never read a book quite like yours. Yours has, apart from the fact that it is so beautifully written, incredible descriptions, it does read a little bit like some kind of detective story, as well as a bit of a Dan Brown thriller. It's got so many elements in it, but yours goes deeper into that spiritual journey than anybody that I've ever read. You went back 3 times, didn't you?
I've gone back many more times than that, but for this particular topic, this mystery, it was 3 devoted conscious pilgrimages. Before I started the first Goose pilgrimage, though, I had been on the Camino many times before, and I have now since several times after. But it was when I really realized this goose symbolism keeps coming up, and every time I'm on the Camino, it comes up in different forms and variations, through people, through stone carvings, through an inlaid board game in Logroño, and on the Camino de Santiago, the Camino Francés, that's called the Game of the Goose, and is also considered a metaphor for the Camino and for life. And it kept coming up, and I thought, I need to do something organized, and go on a pilgrimage that's devoted to looking for the goose signs and noting them all down. And after that pilgrimage was over, I thought, okay, I need to go on another one because I still haven't uncovered it. And after that second pilgrimage was done, I realized I need to at least go to another third one. And the third one was the charm. Maybe there is something in the fairy tales. The 3 is the charm, but it really was that third one that brought everything together into a whole. And I had all these aha moments, and I understood the bigger picture of why the goose and the Camino.
So tell us the story about the goose then. Why the goose?
Why the goose? That was the first time I really heard of it was, well, first of all, I, as an anthropologist, I was already familiar with Camino literature. Even before I had stepped on it, I wanted to read about the historic tales. And I came upon some books in Spanish and in French that were more esoteric, and they were speaking about some pilgrims walking on a spiritual initiatory path, and they would follow signs that were maybe not as evident. We follow scallop shells, we follow arrows, but these pilgrims were also following the footprint of the goose. When I first read that, I thought, what? But then I met some pilgrims on the Camino when I was walking it, mostly from Spain and from France, who also were saying they were on this initiatory spiritual path and they were following signs, and one of them was the footprint of the goose. And that's when I just thought, this is really making no sense, and it's wacky, but it's wonderful, and I'm curious. And then when I encountered that board game inlaid in the square in Logroño, in La Rioja, about a third of the way along the Camino de Santiago across northern Spain, I saw, this is a board game that has 63 squares. It's like a labyrinth or a shimmying serpent going back and forth to the winning square, the 63rd square. On those 63 squares, 13 of them are geese. So they're geese squares, and they're lucky squares. And the parish priest, whose idea is really behind this board game being inlaid on this plaza that is right on the Camino as you walk through Logroño, his whole idea was to say, wake up pilgrims and anyone who passes by the board game to the fact that we are on a spiritual journey in life. And the Camino is a metaphor for life. And the game of the goose is a metaphor for the Camino and for life. and that geese are indeed lucky. They are ancient messengers that have spoken between mortals and the divine, and they are guides and guardians. So look for the goose square as you walk. And that's when I really started saying, I need to pay more attention to this. And I dug more deeply, and I started finding that there is a rich, huge, vast, diverse body of lore from across Eurasia, really. But I was really focusing on European traditions that involves the goose and the goddess. And oftentimes, if the goddess isn't pictured with the goose, and the goose is very explicitly one of her messenger animals or one of her guardian animals, like Juno and the geese who guard her temple, they appear with goose or duck feet. So they become these hybrid divinities embodying qualities of the goose. And I kept finding these web-footed goddesses. And then on the Camino, I found one who is now Mary, who had all of the characteristics of the ancient goddesses, such as showing up at holy streams or cave openings. And she might be combing her hair or spinning flax or wool thread. And very often her feet are in the water, and they're, if you look in, they have goosey or ducky feet, and I realized there's this syncretism happening between the ancient pre-Christian and the Christian female divinities. And the lore just kept building and building. And I realized that, there's this whole folkloric collection of traditions, including our mother goose. Tales of my mother, the goose. Why would Charles Perrault, in what was it, 1695, call these folk tales that he had gathered, stories of Mother Goose or my mother, the goose? Because there was some precedent that there was this guide and guardian, this divine guide and guardian who was the teacher and protector of earth stories. And when you really look into Mother Goose stories, they are earth wisdom tales. And it was a safe way for the feminine divine to survive, now centuries after Christianity, with a very patriarchal flavor of a male elite, essentially determining the sacred traditions to survive and in a safe way. So between folklore, and then I started seeing these images engraved in medieval churches in the stones, especially the Romanesque of the 11th and 12th century, and realized that the Masons were also playing with all these different symbols and folkloric traditions and keeping them in play, even as official versions of Christianity were gaining greater and greater dominance.
So tell me about the parallel universes, which is kind of mentioned in the press releases about your book, a kind of parallel universe to the Christian Camino de Santiago.
Right. Nothing comes into play from a vacuum. So Christianity took root in Europe, overlaying itself on prior traditions. And so almost all the chapels that you find from the Middle Ages were places that were already recognized as holy places before a chapel was built there. There might have been a holy stream or a cave, and the Camino is especially full of these places. And almost all of these chapels are devoted to Mary. She is the first and foremost personality that they're devoted to. And they all have these very beautiful nature-based origin stories. Like there's the Our Lady of Nájera also in La Rioja. She was discovered in a cave. King Garcia, I forget which is the third, was out hunting like around 1044 AD, and his falcon took off after a dove and suddenly disappeared in a thicket of trees against this red stone wall or cliff. And the king parted the trees and went in and saw that there was a cave. And as he went into the cave, he smelled lilies, and then he saw a light. And as he arrived at the back of the cave, there was the falcon and the dove seated peaceably on either side of a beautiful image of the Mother Mary, with lilies at her feet and the candle, this light just coming from. And now there's a candle, but there was this divine light emitting from the cave. There's another story of in Leboreiro, this is in Galicia, of a chapel devoted also to Santa Maria, to Mary. And the story goes that villagers sometime, probably in the 12th century, they'd actually just built their church. And this beautiful spring suddenly emerged and started flowing with water. And they could smell perfume from it by day and see a light coming out of it by night. And they finally went and excavated around it and found inside it was this beautiful, one of the most beautiful icons of the Mother Mary they had ever seen. And they dug her up and they cleaned her off and they took her into their very newly built church, put her on the altar. And the next day, or the next evening, she was back in the spring. And they kept taking her to the altar and she kept going back to the spring. And finally, a stonemason said, why don't I engrave her image as, the queen, the reigning queen of heaven, holding her son on our tympanum, and we devote this church to her. And maybe that way we can put the icon on the altar. And sure enough, after they acknowledged this as her place, the icon stayed on the altar. Except that villagers still say, and one Spanish journalist that I was reading just recently claims that even to this day, villagers will say sometimes they see Mary steal off to the water and she'll be sitting there combing her hair, which is a hearkening back to these pre-Christian female divinities. So it was just this beautiful layering, of these prior sacred systems that were finding a way to continue to fold into the next narrative. People only until very recently, we were all living directly from the earth. We had a knowledge of the earth. We grew our food, we herded, we hunted, we gathered. And when you're in that deep of a relationship with your very livelihood, you are very sensitive to it. You also, to the point where people would make offerings at certain springs or meadows just to assure the health of the crops or the health of the animals. And it's really only something that we've recently kind of lost, we've been separated from. Even more so when we have visualized a divinity that is somewhere up there or out there, but not here rooted in the earth. And all of these stories and these prior spiritualities we're saying is we still need to be rooted in the earth, and the earth is still sacred. And she can be at times represented by Mary, and she can also be represented by these hybrid female divinities who, often have bird feet. And the duck feet and the goose feet are really significant too, because this starts going into shamanic realms. Yes. Where animals that can navigate both the underworld, this world, and the upper world. And geese and ducks, they can dive in water, they lay their eggs on the earth, and they can fly magnificently to the point where they are, especially geese, are the first migratory animals, birds, to say spring is here, or autumn is here, and they start moving long before other birds are willing to take that risk. So
there's lots of stories, obviously, and stories are stories. Engravings, depictions are something else. What was the oldest depiction of the geese that you come across?
A really old one. There is a waterfowl ivory engraving. I believe it's Aurignacian, that goes back about 30,000 years to the earliest mobile art, the earliest human art, some of the earliest human art. But so 30,000 years ago, somebody thought, this creature is important enough to invest in engraving into ivory.
Interesting. So you said that you'd been to the Camino before. You'd been to the Camino before you learned about the geese. At what point did the geese come into the story then for you?
They came into it, I spent a lot of time on several routes of the Camino, especially the Camino Frances, the most famous route. that goes across northern Spain, but also the other route across northern Spain, the Camino del Norte. And that's the one that traverses the Atlantic coastline of Iberia. And that's where I started really hearing these stories of these bird-footed divinities. So it was already on my radar that this is so interesting. And the literature, the anthropological literature and the historical literature speaks, like we have from Strabo from, over 2,000 years ago. He wrote about the northern peoples of Iberia as Romans were making inroads, and said, these are going to be the harder people to assimilate into the empire, because into the Roman world, because their women govern. Their women inherit, their women determine things. So, it was a matriarchal meeting a patriarchal culture. And he knew this is not going to be easy. And that was really intriguing. And I saw that these bird-footed divinities surviving as far as they have in this part of northern Spain was telling me that there was a lot to what Strabo was saying, that there was this foundational native matriarchal culture that still in some ways has survived even to this day. And so that was already on my radar. But then when I walked for the first full through trek on the Camino Frances, that most famous historic route across northern Spain, a little further south in the interior, that's when I began meeting the pilgrims, the Spanish and the French pilgrims, who would say, one especially, he was actually a German pilgrim. I met him in Burgos in Castile, and he had this little handwritten handbook in his, or folded paper. He referred to it as a handbook, in his pocket. And I dearly wanted to read it, but he wouldn't let me. And he said that he was walking a spiritual esoteric path, guided by his Brazilian brother-in-law, who had walked it himself with the same little booklet, guided by a teacher in Switzerland. And so this incredible lineage. And I was just sitting there going, I want to know more about this. And he said, all I can tell you is I'm supposed to pay attention to the signs and follow what the signs tell me on this Camino. And I said, well, what are some of the signs? And he said, well, one of them is the footprint of the goose, or the goose itself. And that's when it really entered my life. And then soon after, just before that conversation, I had stood on the square in Logroño and looked at the game of the goose in, human scale size, inlaid in the square, and had even sent an email to a friend in Barcelona. And I had been there just before doing research for my book, The Spiritual Traveler Spain, and gone to the cathedral in Barcelona and into the cloister, and found that there were 13 geese in that cloister. I didn't count the geese at the time, though. I just knew there were geese. And I thought, well, that's different. That's curious. I wonder what the geese are about. And then I sent an email to a friend in Barcelona. I said, could you, the next time you go by the cathedral, go in and go to the cloister and count how many geese there are? And when she did, and I got the email, it was 13, just like the game of the goose. So all these things converged on that walk to say, okay, there's something real going on here. Pay attention to the geese.
So how did that understanding change your experience of walking the Camino?
It made me, first and foremost, and maybe this is why it's so effective as an initiatory journey, it made me pay much more attention to everything. It became the best method for a walking meditation I think I've ever stumbled upon. And I am one of those people who, when I walk, I'm better as a meditator. Sitting down and meditating, I don't do, I don't find that, present time so readily as walking and letting my footstep be like prayer beads, setting a cadence and falling into the present. But then to really pay attention to the signs and to look for the goose and her footprints made me so present and so aware of my environment and the bottom of my feet, that my connection to the earth, and also the interior states. It was a level of presence I had never achieved before. And I think that's really where I started realizing the power of what was going on here. But even at the beginning, I really was approaching this, in this very intellectual way of, the anthropologist just following the material and seeing where the material leads, looking for all the sources and the evidence. And I didn't really expect it to start working on me. And then I just found myself, it was already working on me when I realized, oh my goodness, I think I'm one of the initiates on this path as well. And I absolutely loved it because it had a magic to it, a very real magic, synchronicity that happens when you are that present and paying attention. You see the doors that are open.
When you had to go home in between those trips, was that pretty hard going for you? I mean, it's like, you're on the threshold of this incredible discovery or quest, and suddenly you've got to leave it, and now it's all in your head.
It's both a relief because it's intense being on the Camino and tracing a mystery like this, but in a way it never ended because going home just gave me time to digest the experiences and reflect on what was going on. And oftentimes it's really, well, not oftentimes, I say every time, it's really true, a good thing for pilgrims to know that when they arrive at their holy destination, in this case, Santiago de Compostela in northwestern Spain, the Camino doesn't end. That's the middle of the Camino. And then, just like a medieval pilgrim, you have to walk home, and half of the journey remains. And for us now, we fly home, or we bus home, or we boat home, and it's a faster journey, but it still takes the same amount of time, if not more time, to process the journey to Santiago de Compostela and gain its lessons. I'm still gaining lessons from the very first Camino I ever took, and all the other ones after it. There's still more there. So it's in a sense, I never left the Camino. I haven't left the Camino yet. And especially in the pursuit of the goose, it was always on my mind.
We're going to take a short break now, Beebe. You're listening to What Is Going On. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer, and my guest today is award-winning travel writer, anthropologist, essayist, and author, who's become known as a great expert on the Camino. And she's the author of the book, The Way of the Wild Goose, 3 Pilgrimages, Following Geese, Stars, and Hunches on the Camino de Santiago. We'll be back with more from Beebe Bahrami after the break. Stay tuned.
OMTimes TV. Imagine becoming a super influencer. Reinvent yourself, invest in your brand, and then manifest your success with a robust spheric approach. OMTimes Media and Broadcasting offers a unique and multifaceted way to become the spiritual and conscious influencer you deserve to be by putting your message across our powerful platform with its proven record of integrity and excellence. Through our produced shows, OMTimes offers the opportunity to become a social media TV personality, a radio show host, an OMTimes magazine columnist, and a syndicated podcaster, all in one shot. By live streaming your show on OMTimes TV and broadcasting it across the extensive OMTimes radio and TV networks, you become more than a host. You become an ambassador and a force for positive change. OMTimes. Open yourself to the possibilities.
Hello, I'm Sandie Sedgbeer, host of OMTimes' flagship radio show, What Is Going On? And as an author, editor, and 13 times book judge who's read thousands of books and interviewed hundreds of authors, I'm constantly asked what's really worth reading and what's not. So I created the No BS Spiritual Book Club to help you save time and money by picking the brains of discerning names who've walked this path before you. There's no catch, no fees, and no BS. Just an ever-growing library of 10 best spiritual book lists from some of your favourite authors and teachers, plus free book excerpts, audios and video interviews with people like Don Miguel Ruiz Jr., David G., Lee Harris, Mark Nepo and more. From well-known classics to hidden gems you've never heard of, it's the only no BS guide to the best spiritual books to enlighten your journey of self-discovery. So why not join the club? Get inspired and save money at the nobsspiritualbookclub.com.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Welcome back. Beebe Bahrami, what would you say is the most important thing that has come out of your journeys on the Camino and your adventures with the geese?
That everything really is interconnected, and that we need to return to our reverence of the earth and taking care of her, and that includes each other and all the creatures on the earth. And that there is an incredible big-heartedness in so many people. And the experience of the Camino, it's a big-heartedness, and it's also a beautiful kind of real magic that takes place once you set foot on the Camino and you trust stepping into the unknown and you open your awareness to just the very present.
How many years were there between those 3 trips that you took, which are chronicled in this particular book?
Yeah, the first pilgrimage chronicled took place in 2012. The one after it, in the second pilgrimage, in 2015, and the third in 2017.
So there's so many people walking the Camino now. Some do it for religious, some do it for spiritual, some do it because it's a good hike, some do it because it's the fashion, some do it in tiny little slices, and others do the whole lot in one go. Do you sometimes, the people that are doing it because it's fashionable, or they don't do it properly, they go on a bus tour and they get off and walk a little bit of it. Do you feel that you wish you could say to them, hey, there's another reason for doing this, pay attention?
I resist that because as much as I have my preferred way of doing it, I love to walk it. I love to carry my rucksack. I think, I love walking the 5 to 6 weeks. That is just one way of many that are all legitimate to do it. And sometimes the person who's doing it on the bus tour it'll spark their interest. And then they'll say, I think I want to go back and walk it. And some people on that bus tour may not be able to walk. It might be why they're on the bus tour. And it's, everyone is there. There's this saying on the Camino that the Camino calls you and it gets you there in the right time, in the right way. And so everyone, if they're compelled to go and find out what the Camino is, I think it's fabulous whether they walk, cycle, horseback ride, bus. There are people who've done it in a wheelchair. I've met a couple of people on crutches. So there's many ways to do it. They're all legitimate, and they're all ways that got that person there. And then they discover, one of the things that I really, I want to encourage anyone to go who wants to go, however they get there, or whatever means it is that they use to do it. Because once you're on it, there's no place else in the world that I know of, except maybe the United Nations, where you're going to meet people from over 190 countries in the world. Unlike the United Nations, you're simplifying your life. You're just taking what you need, what fits into a rucksack, and discover that you don't really need very much, and that when you trust life delivers what you need.
You experienced some amazing synchronicities on those journeys. I mean, would you say that maybe no more than usual, you were just more aware of this, the synchronicity, or do you think there was some kind of magic going on? I mean, it's on a ley line, isn't it? I mean, the whole trail is supposed to
I
be
think it is.
on ley lines.
My experience is yes, it is definitely on a ley line. It is a sort of supercharged synchronistic place, but
Do
we
you
can
feel
see
super empowered?
I, I do, only because I learned by walking it how much everything I need is delivered, even in ways that I could have never imagined. And and I really emphasize need, not want. What I
Yeah,
need is delivered, so
yeah.
there's this kind of honesty and making one honest as well of the Camino. But there's definitely something powerful and supercharged going on there. And I think a part of it is because we humans have chosen this landscape based on certain already innate features that are pulling us, that are charged to walk it. And so we're adding to that. We're adding that extra resonance to it that makes it supercharged. It's a place that also says you are invited here to walk in a way you haven't walked anywhere else, back home. And I think that's a part of it as well, why the synchronicities seem to be so profound. But by walking it, I've also learned, especially walking it several times, and then I discover, wow, this synchronicity and these coincidences, they keep happening in ways I just couldn't have orchestrated or made up. And so having that experience now, at home, I tell myself, pay attention, because there is synchronicity all around us, but you have to notice it. You have to see the openings that are coming at you. And
When you were
you know,
when you were doing those 3 trips, and then you didn't know that you were going to, I imagine, turn that into a book, that each of those trips was pivotal to this particular book. Were you recording your impressions and experiences? Were you writing them down, taking notes the whole time?
I was, every one of those pilgrimages, I was keeping a notebook, and very much, in my training as a writer and as an anthropologist, I call them my field notes. I was noting everything down, including, at night I would definitely do the full download of notes in my journal. But by day, I had just a little, journalist's notebook that you flip open and it can fit in your pocket. And I had that in my pant pocket with a pen, ready to just flip open and jot something down. So I was, and now with the advent of digital photography, that 2012 trip was, wonderful, because it was the first time I really took a digital camera on the trail with me. And then those also could become ways of note taking, or if I saw a goose sign, I could take a photograph of it, and so thousands of photos, a lot of notes. And I think it's really important too. I love really recommending and emphasizing with anyone walking the Camino, whether they see themselves as going as a pilgrim or not, to keep a journal and to write in it every day, and to give themselves that space every day to do it, where they're not talking to anybody else and they just go in and write down their experiences of the day, because we really forget very quickly a lot of the details.
We do.
It's amazing what you find when you go and reread those notes.
Yeah. So the Way of the Wild Goose, that wasn't your first book, was it?
No, my first book, I actually was a guidebook updater for Michelin Green Guides. So my first book was the Provence Guide. It was one of my breaks in the world of travel writing. And then I was commissioned by Paulus Press to research and write The Spiritual Traveler's Spain. And that came out in 2009. And that was a really beautiful experience, because they already knew I was devoted to research and writing on Spain and southern France. And they had this book series, and they said, would you write this book? And it needed to cover the sacred, the most sacred experiences of Spain. And they didn't have to be Catholic. And they of all time, from prehistory to the present. And I spent 4.5 months backpacking across Spain, walking many pilgrimage routes in different parts of the peninsula to write that. And that really gave me fabulous foundation for when I really started devoting myself more and more to the Camino. Following that, I wrote a historic walking guide to Madrid. And then I wrote Café Oc, that is the memoir of living in southwestern France in the Dordogne. And then Café Neanderthal, that spun out of Café Oc when I ran into my old archaeology professor in graduate school and got to excavate a Neanderthal site of La Ferracie. And following Café Neanderthal, the Moon Camino de Santiago, I was given the chance to create this new guidebook for Avalon Travel, which is a division of Hachette. And then The Way of the Wild Goose is the most recent. Yeah.
Well, as we're reading The Way of the Wild Goose, joining you on your journey, you are letting it be known how much you want to be earning your living as a writer. And there is a lot of doubt there and a lack of confidence that can happen. But of course, as we know from what you've just told us, you do earn your living as a writer, and you've been successful at it. And you are, you really do have a great talent for writing. How do you feel now, looking back on that? Do you feel that maybe the Camino, maybe that experience had something to do with that dream coming to fruition?
It had a lot to do with it, a lot, because it was, the dream of becoming a writer. It wasn't, I was writing already. I was writing every day. I was pitching. I was, doing the work, no matter what else I had to do. But it was the confidence that this was a legitimate life that a person could have. It was mostly when I would meet people and they'd say, what do you do? And I'd say, I'm a freelance writer. You could just see, one person even said, no, you're not. That's impossible. And I thought, oh my God, I would never imagine saying that to anyone. But so it was the confidence piece. But the Camino, by walking it and by saying, this is what I really want to do, started delivering those pieces of synchronicity that really said, yes, this is the walk. This is the walk in your life. This is something that really matters. This is your calling. And maybe one of the biggest synchronicities that it happened right on the Camino is it's in the second Camino in the book, after crossing the Pyrenees in an ice storm and landing in Roncesvalles and finding that because I don't like to reserve ahead, I like to land where I'm going to land and then find a place to stay. It's, to me, a part of the adventure. And everything was booked. There were no beds left, and everyone was also really, really wet. And it was a dreary, wet, cold day and place to be. And we had been told to get off the mountain because it was getting dangerous. So I literally skidded down this sort of icy mountainside into Roncesvalles to find there's no place to stay, and just decided I'm going to walk another 3 or 4 kilometers to the next village of Burguete. First place that I see, I'm going to walk in, I'm going to ask for a place to stay. And while all this is going on, I had walked that Camino. I decided I'm going to go back on the Camino because not only did I want to follow the goose, but it was just there was a lot going on in my life that really made me doubt my chops as a writer, and if I had it to stick it out. And I already had landed an agent, which is pretty big. You'd think that would build confidence. And she was shopping around 2 book projects, which were Café Oc and Café Neanderthal. So spoiler alert, she found homes for them. But this was before that had happened, and it was a really hard market, and the publishing world was very, very a lot harder to sell and pitch to. So I thought, oh, I'm going to go walk the Camino while all this is happening, just to get a sense of things and to get back in touch with my center and, and follow the goose. Why not? And unbeknownst to me, while I was crossing the mountain in that ice storm, there were 2 emails from my agent 6 hours apart. And, there is no Wi-Fi in that part of the Pyrenees where I was crossing, and I wouldn't have been able to check it anyway. But when I got to Borghete, and the first place I found, it was a nice little hostel right on the beginning of the village. I went in, and the guy said, "Yep, you're the only guest staying here." And he sort of looked around at the keys hanging on the wall behind him and picked one that seemed significant and gave it to me. And I went and checked in and got showered and changed my clothes. And then I went back down and said, could I get the Wi-Fi code? I need to check Wi-Fi into my emails. And I saw over his shoulder, there's a portrait of Ernest Hemingway. And I said, my goodness, Ernest Hemingway. And he said, oh yeah, this is where Hemingway would stay when he went trout fishing in the Pyrenees. And, like the sun also rises, that's the hotel. And he said, and I gave you his room. And I just thought, oh my God, this guy doesn't even know I'm a writer. This is so fabulous. Well, even more fabulous when I finally got my emails. One email sent 6 hours before the second one from my agent said, you have interest in Café Oak. And then the second email, she said, I don't know what's in the air, but there's a second independent publisher who's interested in Café Neanderthal. Because I had developed these 2 books side by side and sent the proposals off to her almost the same time. And by the time, about 2 weeks later, I think, I on the Camino, both of those books had contracts and offers. And I was thinking, and I first learned about it in Hemingway's room in Hemingway's hotel. And I just thought, never going to doubt this again. You can't have that much writer mojo behind you and doubt things.
Yeah. Well, I mean, your work has appeared in so many magazines now: BBC Travel, Archaeology, Wine Enthusiast, The Bon Vivant, many, many more. And you also do some work with the Smithsonian Journey Tours, don't you?
I do. I'm one of their experts, and I'm hoping, that I'll be on one of their trips soon. The pandemic threw a huge wrench into that.
Yeah.
But yes.
So, of all the different places that you have walked, traveled, seen, is there any particular part of the Camino that's your favorite? Is the Camino your favorite of them all?
That's a really hard question because I love all of southwestern France and all of northern Spain. And especially, one of my methods of learning about a place is I walk. And so I, spend a lot of time in the Dordogne, and a lot of the knowledge of the culture I've gained is from long walks across the countryside and stopping to talk to farmers and herders and winemakers. So I really love that area. And I really do love all of the Camino. I have favorite places for different reasons. I love the Pyrenees crossing because it's just so dramatic and beautiful and remote. I mean, if you can't get Wi-Fi, that's just such a gift, to be in a place like that. And crossing Navarra is just so beautiful. It's like Shire country, and the Meseta is exquisite for its vast, open, endless sky and endless plains. Galicia is gorgeous for its incredible green forests and, misty valleys. I love it all.
Do you not want to move there, to leave America and go and live in France or Spain?
I do. I mean, I'd love to have a foothold here and a foothold there, which is what I'm doing right now. But at some point, I'd really like to have my main base be probably southwestern France. And then I'll be ever ready to get on the Camino and cross the Pyrenees and walk across northern Spain.
You made a wonderful friend when you stayed in France. There's a little town or village that you are particularly fond of.
Yes.
and she was like a mentor to you, a wise elder. Is she still with us?
She is. Thank you for asking about her. Her name is Bernadette. She just turned
Bernadette, yeah.
89, and
Wow.
she is in Sarlat, where is really my home base when I'm
Mm,
in Europe. I go there, and I always touch in with her first. And she really is like the wise woman met at the fork in the road who has words of guidance and advice. I mean, she is a
mm,
goose in that sense, the guide and guardian. And each of my pilgrimages is held by her. It's framed,
yeah.
the beginning and the end. And she always would want to send me off with words of wisdom. And then when I'd come back after a Camino and go to Sarlat, she'd want to sit down with me and get the full download. And then she'd have something uncanny that would fully unlock the whole mystery of what that walk had been
Mm.
about.
Have you found that there are any other, routes that also feature the goose?
Yeah, I think there are. I think there are because, following the folklore trail, if you were to, Jacob Grimm in Teutonic mythology wrote about the goose-footed goddess, and he said there's a goose-footed goddess across Europe. There's one in Scandinavia, there's one in southern Germany, there's one in southern France. There's all these beings in across northern Spain. And I think that anyone walking any of the Camino routes, like the Jakobsweg in Germany or the Chemin de Saint-Jacques in France, would find them.
There is a walking trail in Victoria, BC, and I used to walk it a lot, and it's called the Goose. And
Really?
everybody calls it, I don't know if they call it the Galloping Goose, but it's known as the Goose. We're walking the Goose. And I used to walk it every day
Oh,
when I lived there. And
really?
it never even occurred to me, I hadn't read your book, that there may be some other significance to that name.
Oh my goodness. Well, since you've walked it, now you can reflect on it and see what comes up for you. This is
Mm.
your goose walk. But
Yes,
I'm going to
yes,
look into that. That's exciting.
yeah, yeah. So before we close, tell us about your two blogs. You've got Cafe Oc and the Pilgrim's Way Cafe.
Yes, yes. Café Oc is really about life in southwestern France, and the Pilgrim's Way Cafe is about seeing life from the cadence of feet, of footsteps, and very much about the pilgrim life, but also about exploring the world by walking. And
How often do you post blogs there?
I haven't posted as often lately, but I've been wanting to get back to it. If there's book news, I definitely post there,
Mm,
as well as
mm.
on social media. I've just joined Instagram and I'm learning how to use that, but the blogs are still going to be where I put my book news, as well as my website.
Yeah, because I can imagine that you will have more material when you're actually in France and Spain.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Mm. So, what do you do when you're not traveling and you're not writing about this?
I'm still traveling through my notes, and I'm still writing about it. Like right now, I've just back from spring and summer in France and Spain, and I'm going over all those notes and looking for the next stories. And I think there's a few in there. It's always
Oh,
that.
I'm sure.
Sometimes it's one line that somebody says, and I realize there's a whole story built around that one sentence.
Mm,
So
yeah.
I'm still writing and still traveling, even when I'm not on the Camino, about the Camino or about southwestern France.
Does it get harder each time you go? I mean, with
To be,
age or
yeah,
to walk the Camino?
to walk. Uh, no, it still presents, challenges and gifts, always in a different combination. So it's the same hard and the same wonderful, but different. Each time different because I'm
Mm,
meeting different people.
yeah.
This time I would say the challenge was I was walking during probably one of the busiest times of the year, and after the pause of the pandemic had really ceased, and everyone wanted to be back out there and traveling, and they had bucket lists, and there were so many people with and there was a point where it was almost overwhelming, as much as I was just so happy that the life on the Camino was back, especially the people who live from the Camino, and it's very much a cottage industry for them. So yeah.
Well, Beebe Bahrami, it's lovely to speak with you. Your book is a real treat to read. I'd recommend it to anyone. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you, Sandie. It's been such a joy and honor to be with you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. So, The Way of the Wild Goose, 3 pilgrimages following geese, stars and hunches on the Camino de Santiago by Beebe Bahrami is published by Monkfish Book Publishing and available wherever good books, especially travel books, are sold. For more information about Beebe, visit, I'm going to spell this one out, beebebahrami.com. Not beebebahrami.com, it's Beebe Bahrami. That's BEEBEBAHRAMI.weebly.com. That's it for this week. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer. Thanks for joining us today, and I look forward to being with you at the same time next week. Till then, it's goodbye from me, and thank you again to Beebe.
Thank you so much.